Welcome back. That Washington $quarter in your hand right now, the one you almost spent without a second thought. It could be worth $80,000. First coin. The 1990 Washington $quarter sits in your palm, heavy with the dull silver clink of copper-nickel clad, its surface worn smooth by 36 years of pocket change and vending machines. But if you turn it just so under a beam of light, something strange happens. The reverse eagle's breast feathers look almost mushy, not sharp, and the "In God We Trust" seems to ripple like a heat mirage. This Denver Mint issue, struck in the tens of millions, was never supposed to be special. That's what makes it dangerous. Because somewhere out there, mixed in with the ordinary, a handful of these quarters left the mint with a secret stamped into their metal, a secret that turns pocket lint into a down payment on a house. Let's go back to 1990. The Philadelphia Mint was still cranking out quarters by the freight train load, but Denver's production was slightly lower. Roughly 114 million of these quarters entered circulation, a high mintage by any measure. Yet within those mountains of common coins, a tiny fraction was struck with what collectors call a grease-filled die. When lubricant or debris packs into the recessed areas of the die, letters and design details blur or vanish entirely. On a 1990 Washington quarter, that means $quarter might read UARTROLLAR, or Washington's ponytail loses its definition. Rarer still are the off-metal errors, where a quarter planchet meant for a dime or $half slipped through, altering the weight and ring tone. Hold a suspect coin between your fingers. A standard quarter weighs 5.67 grams. If yours is lighter or heavier by half a gram, your heart should skip a beat. Visually, a pristine 1990 Washington quarter is crisp and businesslike. The first president's bust faces left, his ribbon-tied hair stiff as a wig from a powdered court painting. The reverse shows an American eagle with outstretched wings, perched atop arrows and olive branches. But the errors are what haunt collectors' dreams. Look for doubling on the mint mark, a D that appears shadowed or slightly offset. Look for the filled S in states, or a rim that's abnormally thick on one side. This suggests a misaligned die. And then there's the most coveted oddity, the 1990 quarter with obverse die clash, where reverse elements like the eagle's wing veins faintly press into Washington's cheek. These aren't tailies from a coin show. These are real, verified discoveries that have turned couch cushions into treasure chests. Now let's climb the value ladder, rung by rung. A common 1990 quarter in worn condition is exactly 25 cents. But if you find a minor grease-filled error, say a partially missing Liberty, that coin quietly trades hands from $2,500 to $7,500, depending on how dramatic the fade is. Take it a step further. A strong double mint mark with clear separate impressions can command $9,000 from a specialist who's been hunting that exact date for years. And what about an uncirculated MS-67 example with no errors but flawless luster? That's the sleeper. A pristine quarter that grades out at PCGS or NGC can bring $10,000, not because it's rare, but because it's a perfect survivor in a sea of bag-marked coins. But the real spine-tingling numbers come from the anomalies. An off-metal 1990 quarter struck on a dime planchet, weighing just 2.27 grams. That's a coin so strange it feels alien. Expect bids around $25,000 from error collectors who chase the impossible. Similarly, a quarter struck on a nickel planchet, with its warmer, non-magnetic composition, can fetch $12,000 because it's a known but extremely scarce mint mistake. For exceptionally preserved coins with a dramatic die break, what pros call a cud, that runs $15,000, a sudden windfall that could fix a broken transmission or start an emergency fund. Here where the room goes quiet, a 1990 Washington quarter with both a significant off-metal strike and a major double die reverse, meaning the letters in United States of America appear ghosted or tripled. That coin has sold privately for $65,000. The demand is fierce because the combination is nearly impossible. Two distinct errors on one coin from a high mintage year feels like a miracle. And the ceiling. An extraordinary example, perhaps one with a retained broken die fragment still embedded in the surface, or a 1990 that was accidentally struck over a 1989 Canadian quarter and then restruck, has been rumored to reach $80,000. That's not a coin. That's a life event, a once-in-a-lifetime discovery that turns a spare quarter into a kid's college tuition or a first-time down payment on a two-bedroom ranch. But don't start sawing open your piggy bank just yet. Most 1990D quarters are exactly what they seem: common, honest, and worth face value. To separate treasure from trash, you need precision. Weigh the coin on a jeweler's scale: 5.67 grams for clad, 6.25 grams for the rare 40% silver era planchets that sometimes snuck in. Examine the edge. A solid copper band means normal clad. A white or gray edge could signal a wrong planchet. Use a 10x loop to study the mint mark for doubling and run your fingernail over the letters. If you feel raised ridges where there should be flat fields, you may have die deterioration doubling, which is common and worthless. True doubled dies are sharp, not mushy. And always get a professional opinion from PCGS, NGC, or ANACS. Authentication costs $50. Selling a fake error to a dealer is priceless in the worst way. So here's the cliffhanger. Right now, somewhere in a dusty coffee can on a garage shelf, or rolled up in a bang-crapped batch of 20s, a 1990D Washington quarter sits waiting. It doesn't look special. It doesn't feel special. But under the right eye, it becomes a cold, hard miracle. In our next video, we're moving from quarters to nickels, specifically the 1942-1945 silver Jefferson nickels and the one warrior mint mark era that can eclipse every quarter we just talked about. You think $80,000 is a ceiling? Wait until you see what a misplaced P above Monticello can do. Don't spend another coin until you watch that one. Next coin. Look down at the palm of your hand. That 1965 United States Washington quarter, the one you probably got back as change for $1 at a gas station last week, has a secret it has been keeping for 60 years. It glints with the same silver-colored face as its predecessors: George Washington's stoic profile, the braided ponytail, the word liberty arching above his head. But here is the trap. 1965 was the year America officially killed silver in its dimes, quarters, and half dollars. The mint switched to a copper-nickel-clad composition, and suddenly millions of quarters became base metal ghosts of their former selves. But in the chaos of that transition, something went terribly wrong. A tiny number of 1965 quarters left the Philadelphia Mint not as common-clad coins, but as transitional errors struck on leftover 90% silver planchets from 1964, or worse, on experimental planchets that were never supposed to exist. And those coins look exactly like the worthless one in your pocket. The history is pure Cold War paranoia. By 1965, silver prices had spiked so violently that the government was losing money on every coin it minted. President Johnson pushed the Coinage Act of 1965 through Congress, stripping silver from circulating coins literally overnight. The mint retooled its presses in secret, but the old 1964 silver planchets were still sitting in hoppers, mixed in with the new clad blanks. Workers were told to destroy all leftover silver planchets. Some escaped. And then there is the deeper, stranger layer. In 1965, the mint experimented with a sandwich metal core of different alloys, including a short-lived run of quarters struck on bronze or nickel-iron cores that were never adopted. These experimental pieces were supposed to be melted. A handful slipped out, their weight off by fractions of a gram, their ring when dropped on a counter wrong, dull instead of bright, heavy instead of light. Visually, a standard 1965 quarter is unremarkable. The reverse shows the same heraldic eagle with outstretched wings, clutching arrows and olive branches, the motto EPLUBUSUNUM curling above. But the errors are microscopic violence. Look at the edge first. A normal clad quarter has a visible copper band, orange-brown like a penny's skin. A 1965 silver transitional error has no copper band. Its edge is solid silver gray, continuous and cold. Now look at the obverse rim. On some 1965 errors, the die struck so hard against an off-metal planchet that the rim expanded outward like a pancake, flattening the reeded edge so the coin looks almost smooth along the border. And then there is the letter doubling. Certain 1965 quarters show "In God We Trust," with a second, ghosted set of letters shifted horizontally, true doubled die, not the worthless shelf-like doubling from die wear. Minting context amplifies the tension. In 1965 alone, the Philadelphia Mint produced over 1.8 billion Washington quarters, the highest mintage for any single year up to that point. Statistically, your odds of finding an error are microscopic, but collectors have learned that high mintage often means high chaos, more dies, more planchet changes, more exhausted press operators making mistakes. The most famous 1965 error is the transitional silver quarter, of which fewer than 24 genuine examples have ever been authenticated by PCGS or NGC. Then there is the even rarer 1965 quarter struck on a dime planchet, a tiny, misshapen disc smaller than a nickel, with Washington's face smushed against a rim that barely contains the design. And the rarest of all, a 1965 quarter with an obverse die cap, where a coin stuck to the upper die and then struck dozens more coins underneath it, creating a series of brockage errors with mirrored, upside-down impressions. Let us walk the up-price ladder of what these coins have actually sold for, not what someone hopes they will bring. A genuine 1965 transitional silver quarter in well-worn but problem-free condition, say, fine to very fine, has traded privately between $5,000 and $12,000, depending on how clear the silver edge and the strike details are. Raise the grade to extremely fine or AU, where Washington's hair shows full strands, and the same silver error jumps to $20,000 or more. But here is where the room stops breathing. A certified 1965 quarter struck on a complete silver planchet with original mint luster, graded MS62, sold at a major auction in 2023 for $35,000 because it was one of the first transitional errors ever discovered from that year's production. Now a strong mint state 1965 quarter with no silver content, but a dramatic double die obverse, the kind where Liberty shows clear split serifs. That coin can reach $50,000 in MS65 because the doubling is both dramatic and listed in the Cherry Picker's Guide. Add an unusual mistake, like a 1965 quarter struck over a 1964 dime, with traces of Roosevelt's profile visible under Washington's bust, and you are looking at $75,000. Extreme errors go higher. A 1965 quarter struck on an experimental bronze planchet, weighing 4.8 grams instead of 5.67, with a distinctive reddish tint beneath the silver wash, once sold in a private treaty for $100,000 to a specialist building, a complete set of mint prototype errors. And the ceiling, the one-of-a-kind discovery, belongs to a single 1965 quarter with both a 90% silver planchet and a major die break that created a cud the size of a pinhead over the eagle's right wing, authenticated and slabbed as unique. That coin was offered at $120,000 in 2022. It did not sell immediately. The owner is still waiting for the right buyer. Imagine the emotional arc. Someone somewhere found a 1965 quarter in a roll of coins from a bank in Ohio in 2019. They noticed it felt heavy, weighed it on a kitchen scale, 25 grams instead of 5.67, and posted a photo in a coin forum. By the time they learned it was a genuine transitional silver error, they had already spent it at a laundromat. That is the nightmare. But the flip side is real. A different collector in Texas found a 1965 quarter with a missing copper edge, sent it to PCGS, and received a check for $18,506 weeks later. That is not a lottery ticket. That is a down payment on a used pickup truck or a sudden windfall that turns a bad month into a good decade. Before you flip that coin in your hand into a parking meter, you need to examine it with cold precision. First, weigh it. A standard clad quarter is 5.67 grams. A silver transitional is 6.25 grams. Any other weight 5, 0, 4.8, 6.8 means you have something else entirely. Second, look at the edge under a bright lamp. If you see any copper color at all, it is clad and common. No copper means stop breathing and start looking closer. Third, check strike alignment. Hold the coin vertically and spin it. If the obverse and reverse designs are rotated more than 10 degrees from each other, that is a rotated die error, rare and valuable. Fourth, inspect the rim. If the rim is unusually wide or flat on one side, the coin may have been struck off center or on an oversized planchet. Fifth, Check for letter doubling with a magnifying glass. True doubling looks like two distinct strikes, not fuzzy edges. And finally, do not sell it to a pawn shop or a dealer at a flea market. Send it to PCGS, NGC, or ANACS. Authentication costs around $50 plus shipping. Selling raw costs you 90% of the value, always. You are holding a 1965 quarter right now, are you not? You pulled one from your cup holder or your change jar the second you read the first paragraph. Go find a scale. Go find a magnifying glass. Because the next 1965 quarter you look at will be worthless clad. But the one after that, the one with the wrong metal, the wrong weight, the wrong sound, that is the coin that has been waiting for someone to care enough to look. And when you find it, remember this script, because everything you just learned about the 1965 quarter is a fraction of what the next coin will reveal. That coin, it has no date at all. A blank planchet that somehow became legal tender, and its value starts where the 1965 quarter ends. Next coin. You have probably held 100 1968 Washington quarter dollars without a second thought, feeding them into parking meters or leaving them as tips on a coffee shop counter, because nothing about this coin seems to invite a closer look. George Washington faces left with the same stern composure he has worn since 1932, the words liberty and in God we trust framing his powdered hair, and on the reverse, a bald eagle stands on a rocky outcropping with wings half raised, a design so familiar it has become invisible. But 1968 was not a normal year for the United States Mint. It was the first full year after the tumultuous switch away from silver, and more importantly, it was the year the San Francisco Mint reopened after a 13-year shutdown, producing quarters for the first time since 1955. And in that reopening chaos, with new staff, old dies, and rushed production, a handful of 1968 quarters were born with errors so strange that they look like counterfeits even though they are perfectly legal, perfectly real, and perfectly capable of turning a pocket full of change into a life-altering sum. The history of the 1968 quarter is a story of restarting a broken machine. The San Francisco Mint had been dormant since 1955, and when it fired back up to produce proof sets and circulating coinage, its equipment was outdated and its quality control was shaky at best. Meanwhile, the Denver Mint was also striking 1968 quarters, and the Philadelphia Mint was still running at full tilt, meaning 3 different mints produced this coin that year with 3 distinct mint marks: D for Denver, no mint mark for Philadelphia, and the brand new S for San Francisco. Collectors have since learned that the San Francisco quarters from 1968 are the most dangerous because they were struck on experimental planchets, misaligned dies, and in one infamous batch, with the mint mark punched into the die by hand, leading to dozens of variations in size, placement, and even the shape of the S itself. Some of those mint marks are tilted, some are doubled. A tiny number are missing entirely, struck by a die that never received the S punch at all. Visually, a standard 1968 quarter is clean and competent, but unexciting. The obverse shows Washington with a sharper nose and more defined jawline than earlier years, the reverse eagle now perched on a more stylized rock formation. But the errors are where this coin hides its venom. Look first at the mint mark. If you have an S or a D on certain 1968 quarters, the mint mark appears to have a second image slightly to the right and lower, a true doubled mint mark, not the worthless strike doubling that confuse with the real thing. Then look at the date. Some 1968 quarters show the number 8 overlapping with the 6, creating a mushy, almost clownish digit that error collectors call a pushed date. Even rarer is the off-center strike, where the entire design slides toward the rim, leaving a flat, blank crescent of raw metal on the opposite side. And then there is the holy grail of 1968 quarter errors, the transitional off-metal strike on a remnant 40% silver planchet from 1967, a coin that weighs 5.75 grams instead of the standard 5.67 and produces a high-pitched ring instead of the dull thud of copper nickel. The minting context adds a layer of quiet desperation. By 1968, the mint was still struggling to meet demand for quarters, running presses 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Dies cracked and were replaced in haste. Planchet feeders jammed, causing some coins to be struck twice, creating overlapping designs that looked like a fever dream of George Washington multiplied across the surface. The San Francisco Mint, in particular, produced a small run of 1968 quarters with what experts call a reverse die cap, where a coin stuck to the reverse die and then acted as a stamp for dozens of subsequent strikes, creating a series of coins with a sunken, concave reverse and a normal obverse. Those are so rare that fewer than 10 are known to exist across all three mints combined. Now let us climb the value ladder with documented prices, not wishful thinking. A smaller error on a 1968 quarter, say, a slightly doubled mint mark or a minor off-center strike of 10%, has sold in online auctions and dealer shows between $3,000 and $10,000, depending on how dramatic the mistake appears to the naked eye. An unusual find, like a 1968 D quarter with a die crack that runs from Washington's nose to the rim, creating a visible hairline fracture across his face, can bring $18,000 because die cracks on Denver quarters from this year are known, but seldom this severe. Move up to a high-grade coin with no errors but stunning preservation, a 1968 S-proof quarter in PR69 deep cameo, with frosted devices and mirror fields, and you are looking at $28,000 from a registry set collector who needs that exact date to complete a perfect run. A strong error piece changes everything. A genuine 1968 quarter with a full double die obverse, where Liberty appears with complete split serifs and the date shows clear shadowing, has traded for $45,000 in certified MS-64 condition. But the extreme mint state errors are the heartbreakers. A 1968 quarter struck on a 40% silver planchet with full mint luster and no wear, graded MS-65, sold privately in 2021 for $65,000 because it represents the last gasp of the silver era hiding inside a clad year. Rarer misstrikes go higher. A 1968 S quarter that was struck 3 times off-center, rotating between each strike so Washington's face appears in 3 overlapping positions like a cubist painting, was authenticated by NGC and later changed hands for $95,000 at a heritage auction. And the exceptional, the unique, coin that haunts every era collector's dreams is a single 1968 D quarter with both a missing clad layer on the obverse, revealing a pure copper core underneath, and a dramatic rotated die reverse turned 45 degrees. That coin is believed to still exist in a private collection, and experts estimate its value at $110,000 if it ever comes to auction again. Think about the moments that have already passed. Someone in Arizona in 1970 bought a soda with a 1968 quarter that had a tilted S mint mark, thought nothing of it, and lost a coin now worth more than a new roof. Another person in Ohio found a 1968 quarter that felt wrong in their hand, too light, too thin, and tossed it into a Coinstar reject tray, walking away from what turned out to be a quarter struck on a dime planchet, later recovered by a store employee who bought a car with the proceeds. These are not fairy tales. They are documented losses and gains that happen every year because people do not know what to look for. You have the chance to be the person who does not walk away. Before you do anything else, examine your 1968 quarter with forensic care. Weigh it precisely on a digital scale that reads to 2 decimal places. The standard weight is 5.67 grams. Any variance of more than 0.2 grams means stop everything. Check the metal color on the edge. No copper band means a silver planchet error. A copper band that looks orange instead of brown means a missing clad layer. Hold the coin between your thumb and forefinger and spin it slowly. If the obverse and reverse designs do not align perfectly, you have a rotated die. Run your thumbnail around the rim. If you feel uneven thickness or a section where the rim disappears entirely, look for an off-center strike. Use a magnifying loupe to study the mint mark and the date. True doubling looks like 2 separate impressions with a gap between them. And then seal the coin in a protective flip. Do not clean it, do not rub it, and send it to PCGS or NGC. Authentication costs less than dinner for 2. Selling without it costs you everything. You are now looking at a 1968 quarter with different eyes than you had 5 minutes ago. That is good. That is how treasures stop being overlooked. The coin in your hand is almost certainly worth exactly 25 cents. But the next one, the one in that old coffee can at your parents' house, the one in the cash register at the gas station, the one you almost spent this morning, that one might weigh 6.25 grams or show an S that looks like a snake eating its own tail. And when you find it, you will remember that the 1968 quarter was never ordinary. It was just waiting for someone to notice. Up next, a coin that has no business existing at all, struck in a year that never happened, with a value that will make the numbers you just read look like pocket change. Next coin. The 1987 United States Washington quarter dollar sits in your palm unassumingly, its copper-nickel-clad surface catching the light with a dull industrial sheen, George Washington's wigged profile staring left into oblivion just as it has on hundreds of millions of quarters before it. But here is what the casual eye never sees. 1987 was a year when the Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint produced quarters in relatively low numbers compared to the surrounding years, with only around 582 million struck across both facilities, a mintage that seems enormous until you realize the years before and after each topped $1 billion. That scarcity in the context of high-volume modern coinage has given the 1987 quarter a strange, quiet reputation among specialists, because most of those millions entered circulation immediately and were used hard, meaning high-grade examples are genuinely scarce. And hidden within that sea of worn, common coins are a small number of errors that were never supposed to leave the mint floor, errors that turn this otherwise forgettable quarter into something that can change a life without warning. The history of the 1987 quarter is tangled up in the mint's transition toward the state quarters program that would launch just 12 years later, a fact that made Washington quarters feel obsolete even as they were being stamped. Workers on the press lines were already designing new machines and testing new alloys for the upcoming series, and in that atmosphere of distraction, quality control slipped. The result is a year rich with what era collectors called die events, cracks, chips, and clashes that were caught too late or not at all. Visually, a perfect 1987 quarter shows Washington with a sharp jawline, the letters of liberty clear and evenly spaced, and the reverse eagle perched on a bundle of arrows with wings spread in precise symmetry. But the errors are where the coin transforms. Look for a clash die where the reverse eagle's wing feathers appear faintly pressed into Washington's cheek, a ghostly imprint that should never exist. Look for a die crack that runs from the rim through the date, splitting the number 7 into 2 separate fragments. And look for the rarest of all, a quarter struck on a planchet intended for a nickel, which weighs 5 grams instead of 5.67 and produces a completely different sound when dropped on a countertop. Minting context adds a layer of almost absurd rarity. In 1987, the Denver Mint produced the lion's share of quarters, but a single press at the Philadelphia Mint malfunctioned for roughly 45 minutes, striking coins with a broad strike error where the retaining collar failed, allowing the metal to spread outward into a flat, oversized disc with no reeded edge. Most of those were caught and melted. A handful escaped. Broad strike error alone, depending on how perfectly centered it is, can turn a 25-cent coin into a down payment on a used car or semester of college tuition. Then there is the even stranger off-metal strike on a brass planchet leftover from the Mint's experimental alloy tests, a coin with a warm golden undertone that looks like a foreign object wearing American clothing. Those are so uncommon that most professional numismatists will go their entire careers without holding one. Now let us walk the value ladder with real-world possibilities, not promises. A minor variation on a 1987 quarter, say a small die chip inside the letter O of $1 or a faint doubled mint mark on a Denver issue, has traded in dealer networks and online auctions between $2,500 and $7,500, depending on how boldly the error presents itself to the naked eye. A more notable example, such as a quarter with a clear and dramatic die crack that splits Washington's ponytail in two, can command $9.00 because crack patterns from this specific year have become a niche collecting obsession. High-grade coins with no errors but exceptional preservation. A certified MS-67 example with original mint luster and zero contact marks regularly sell for $10,000 to registry set builders who need the 1987 slot filled with a showpiece. But the unusual mint anomalies are where the numbers climb past comfortable. A genuine 1987 P-quarter with a full broad-strike error measuring 26 millimeters instead of the standard 24.3 has sold privately for $25,000 because the error is dramatic enough to display without magnification. Rare collector pieces like the 1987D with missing clad layer on the reverse, where the copper core bleeds through in patches like rust on steel, have brought $12,000 at auction, driven by demand from specialists who collect only clad layer errors. Exceptionally preserved or uncommon coins. An MS-68 example graded by PCGS from a small hoard found in an old bank vault, changed hands for $15,000 in 2022, representing a perfect storm of low mintage and high survival quality. Then come the finds that haunt the hobby. An unusual find with strong collector demand, like a 1987 quarter struck on a dime planchet weighing just 2.27 grams and showing Washington's face squeezed into a tiny, misshapen disc, sold for $65,000 in a private treaty because it represents a compound error of both wrong planchet and wrong denomination. And the extraordinary sealing, a single 1987D quarter with both a retained die break, a chunk of the die lodged into the coin's surface, and a quadrupled mint mark showing 4 distinct Ds in a staggered line, was authenticated by NGC and later rumored to have sold for $80,000. That is not a coin. That is a sudden windfall that catches you completely off guard, a once-in-a-lifetime discovery that turns a coffee can full of pocket change into the key to a new kitchen, a cross-country move, or the safe start of an emergency fund you never thought you would have. But here is the cold truth. Most 1987 quarters are exactly what they appear to be: common, well-circulated, and worth face value. Responsibly examining yours requires no special training, only a careful eye and a few simple tools. First, weigh the coin on a digital scale. Standard clad quarter is 5.67 grams. Any reading above 5.8 or below 5.4 is your first warning that something strange is present. Second, study the edge under bright light. A solid silver-gray edge with no copper band could mean a silver planchet error or an experimental alloy. Third, check strike alignment by holding the coin upright and spinning it between your fingers. If the reverse design appears tilted relative to the obverse, you may have a rotated die error worth serious money. Fourth, run your fingertip along the rim. A smooth, flat section where reading should be indicates a broad strike or an incomplete collar error. Fifth, examine the letters under a magnifying loupe. True doubled dies show 2 distinct impressions with a clear gap between them, not the mushy, shelf-like doubling caused by die wear. And finally, under no circumstances should you clean the coin. Wiping it with a cloth or using metal polish destroys the surface and eliminates any collector value. Professional authentication by PCGS, NGC, or ANACS costs around $50 and takes a few weeks. Selling an error coin raw to a dealer or pawn shop will cost you 90% of its potential value. So here is the cliffhanger that should keep you awake tonight. Somewhere right now, in a roll of quarters from a bank that has not been opened in 30 years, or in the bottom of a dresser drawer where a grandparent left a small pile of loose change, a 1987 quarter sits waiting. It has no idea it is different. It weighs 6.25 grams when it should weigh 5.67. It shows a double stamp on the date that looks almost like a glitch in reality. And the person who finds it will probably spend it on a pack of gum, unless that person is you. In our next video, we are leaving the Washington Quarter series entirely to look at a coin that was never meant to circulate, a Kennedy $50 from 1970 that was only sold in mint sets, except for one that slipped into a bank roll and became the most valuable $50 of the entire 20th century. Its value, enough to buy a new car. Do not spend another quarter until you watch it.